Here we are.
Yes.
Wayne Francis.
Yes.
This is
my.
unbelievable.
Yes.
To have this opportunity to sit down with you in front of a live audience and talk about some important issues, one big important issue.
Yep.
And I think it's cool that we get to do this together. Black fist, white knuckles.
Let's go.
An open conversation.
Yeah. About race
on
and
race.
reconciliation.
What a big deal. What an important subject.
Yeah.
But first, we got to talk about something special.
Uh-oh.
Life Church, New York.
Let's go.
Life Church, New York. This is
concrete jungle where dreams are made. Oh, I'm sorry.
Keep going, keep going. I think this is so amazing and so unusual, you know.
Yeah.
And I think obviously people would want to know, how did this happen and how did this come about? I mean, we're a few weeks away from, you know, Authentic Church becoming Life Church. You want to talk about it for a minute?
Absolutely. Well, you had me at hello.
This is what this is going to be like, everybody. Just pray for me, please.
No, it's just interesting that a conversation that started between you, me, and my wife and Pastor Leslie in a parking lot after a conference in Birmingham, Alabama, would turn into what is happening right now. It's just pretty exciting to see how effortless our relationship was. I think...
Yeah, we were looking for ways to hang out. That's how we did
you were
that.
like, hey, why don't you just come down? And I was like, yeah, this is so cool.
Yeah, and we always had it in our heart to do locations outside of Memphis. We have Santiago, Santiago, Chile with Josh and Jessica. They're doing an amazing job.
Yeah.
5 years old or something. But so that international location, but to have a national location, to have a location within the United States but outside Memphis is such a big deal. We feel completely honored and so happy to have you and Classy and your family and the Authentic Church family as a part of our family.
Absolutely.
Pumped about it.
I feel like it's been a divine flow. That's what we call it.
Yeah.
There's just been
like
a
a
divine
supernatural connection.
Absolutely. And I'm just thrilled to be a part of this church and that we're one church just doing great things for God. It's going to be exciting. In the Big Apple.
Let's go. Let's go.
I want to let everybody know that doing what we're doing, it's about laying down logos and egos to do something greater for God. That this partnership is about...
That's great.
Ensuring our rootedness, enhancing resources, and expanding our reach.
Yeah.
And that's why we have to do it. And I think just that in and of itself is an important thing that we need to get across. And I just want to say thank you again. I love you.
I love you too. Black fist.
Yes.
White knuckles.
Yes. So why are we doing this series?
I think this is a big deal. I think it's a big issue in our country. You sent me this study done by the Pew Research Institute. I think 6 out of 10 adults have said this is a problem in our country. Racial tension is an issue. And I think it's a big deal. I think we got to talk about it. We've tried to talk about it. I've tried to talk about it in our church in a life-giving way. I know you have too. We both have been privileged to lead churches that are diverse.
Yep.
Thank God for that. We'll talk more about that as the series goes on. But, you know, the word relevant has been a hot word for church and for ministry. And it means literally to speak about the issues. You know, if you looked it up in the dictionary, relevant would mean pertaining to the issues at hand.
Correct, yeah.
And I think that's what drew people to Jesus. I think Jesus had multitudes around him because he talked about real issues.
Absolutely.
And it's not easy to talk about real issues, especially in church. Sometimes people come to church and they don't want to talk about the real issues. But we both feel very strongly and have just a strong sense of conviction that the Word of God speaks to it.
Right.
We need to speak to it. And so that's why we're doing it.
And I think that if we are going to reach each other, if we're really going to have a conversation that is worth it, we have to have an open heart, an open mind, and even open hands.
Yeah.
So when we came up with this title, Black Fist, White Knuckles, I could speak to it from the black fist part. So
please do.
I grew up with a lot of hair, more hair on the sides of my head back then that I have on top now.
You got great hair.
Thank you very much. Worked hard on it today. But I grew up, and this is a fascinating thing. This is when I first got exposed to the symbol of a black fist. For many black young men, we had that pick. Here's a pick of a pick.
Voila. I remember those.
You remember those, right?
Yeah.
It had the black fist symbol, but I didn't know where it started. Actually, I knew where it started. I didn't know that it would end up on a hair piece.
Right.
But back in 1968 in Mexico City, 2 African-American athletes stood up in defiance during the ceremony, the medal ceremony, the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Iconic picture, black gloves, to show symbolism and solidarity amongst black people, to kind of push back against the residue of segregation and slavery and systematic oppression that was happening in North America, and it's still happening in North America in many places.
Right.
And so that's how the black fist situation came up as a symbol of black power in the community.
And when we talk about white knuckles, obviously white knuckles represent when you're trying to hold on to something too tightly, and I think that represents oftentimes in the white community a tendency to try to hold on to the past or to try to stay focused on something that has changed.
Right.
And you know, especially when the knuckles get really white, it's, you know, like you're gripping tight.
Right.
You're trying to control.
Fear.
Could be based on fear. And so we've got to set aside the black fist and the white knuckles and open our hands.
Absolutely.
And open our hearts.
Yeah.
And try to have a dialogue
Absolutely.
and talk about something that's important to all of us. I think it's good for us to mention just a couple of things, Wayne. First of all, there's no presumption on our part that we're going to solve the issue by having a series.
Yeah.
And we're not trying to come out of this series with some big statement, some big press release.
Yeah.
It's not about that. It's about starting a conversation.
Exactly.
And my hope is, and I know we've talked about this, is that as Wayne and I have this kind of conversation, so other people can have this kind of conversation, and it would open up dialogue with people about, I don't understand this, explain this to me, or
right.
you know, we've had a lot, me and you have had a lot of conversations.
Oh yeah.
We've had a lot of conversations, and I've learned a lot. The second thing I think that's important is we don't want to presume that this is the only area of tension where racial tension is concerned. The black-white relationship. There are other painful examples of racism, but for us in the United States, we would agree that it's probably the primary one.
Yeah.
And it's important, I think, as we start the conversation, that people get to know us a little bit more.
Getting to know you.
I think that, you know, here at Life Church, we have gotten to know you more, but we want to know you more. But Authentic Church would love Authentic Church to actually get to know me and get to know us through this series. But so let's start with you.
Well, I grew up in the Northeast Bronx, New York City, and I am the only son of Jamaican parents. Hallelujah.
I love that. That's one of my favorite things about you is when you go back into that
Jamaican,
that dialect, whatever, that accent. I've learned some Jamaican.
You have?
In the process.
You want to practice it, right?
Yeah, I've learned how to say your name in Jamaican.
Let's hear it.
Win.
Yes.
Win.
Come here, boy. Win. So I grew up in the Northeast.
The Bronx. That was pretty good.
That was awesome. I'm not gonna lie. You were practicing for a little while.
I had to.
I've given him Jamaican Rosetta Stone for free. So I grew up in the Northeast Bronx, and our family had just begun to move on up to the east side. And we were living in a predominantly white neighborhood during the time, interestingly enough. But we had a Latino family across the street. We had some Asian people that were down the block, and it was very interesting to have that kind of neighborhood. In fact, when I went to school in 3rd grade, my class looked like the United Nations. It was like, it was so diverse. There we go. You see my collar game over here?
That's awesome.
So that's my class.
Look at that guy right there.
Oh, you're so cute.
Win.
But interestingly, in such a diverse neighborhood like this, and with a class that looked like a cultural salad bowl, this was the first place that I got exposed to racism. And it was the first place that I became very acquainted that I was different from other people based on the hue of my skin. And so one time, my mom and I, around this time in 3rd grade, we were in a predominantly white neighborhood going to take the bus. And there was a group of white teenagers, a bunch of boys that we were walking past. My mom was holding my hand and we were walking past them. And right when we walked past them, somebody threw a really big rock, hit my mom right in the back, called us both the N-word, and it was the first time that I was so startled. Wow. So I looked up to my mom, and in her, just classic Jamaican voice, she said, "Don't worry, baby. Just keep walking. Let's keep going." And interestingly, since then in my life, I've had the rocks of racism hit me at different times. But the way my mom responded that day has taught me something. That just don't worry, baby. Walk on. You have to keep walking even though it hurts, Yeah.
That's powerful. A mom's touch, a mom's leadership or comfort to be able to guide you in that. And my upbringing was different than yours.
Okay.
Westminster neighborhood in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in the South.
Yeah.
So I think we have a picture of my 5th grade class, which is
so diverse.
All white. All white.
The only reason why there's black to this is because there's black and white photo.
Oh, very true. So here I am right here, number 42. And here's Leslie right here. We were in 5th grade together. And this is a good friend of ours. She's pretty dark right here. Come on, Wayne, give me a little credit right here. Paige
That was a 10.
Darbone. That's a 10. It was a 10, Leslie. So, a predominantly white neighborhood. There were some black people in our neighborhood, and there were some black kids in school. And by the way, I use the word black because I've gotten permission to use that word from my black friends. I both know Mayo.
Yeah, Mayo's great.
And Mayo, I was saying African American. He stopped me and said, "John, just call me black. I'm black. I'm good with it. I'm okay with it." And you and I have talked about this as well. For some white people, they don't know what to say. That's a part of the conversation we need to have. But white neighborhood, predominantly white school. But I'm thankful for one thing about my parents. Both my parents were from Wisconsin. And they grew up in the North, and I'm thankful that they didn't carry with them that Southern baggage, that Southern racism baggage. In fact, during the summers when I was in elementary school, I would go and, work in my dad's lab, and he was a professor, and he always had graduate students around, and they were from all over the world. I mean, there were always Indian students and African students and South America. So I feel like that really helped me and helped me get a bigger worldview when it comes to different ethnicities. And there's one story. You have your story. I remember one story when I was probably in about 3rd grade or 4th grade. We went to get some lunch for our family. My dad and I went to get some lunch at Bonaparte's Fried Chicken.
Right. Okay.
And it had to be the summer. It was super hot outside, and I think their air conditioning wasn't working because it was really hot inside there as well. We were in a line, and it was taking long, and people were frustrated.
Yeah.
There was a black woman serving behind the counter, an older black woman, and behind my dad and I, there was an older white man. And he was obviously frustrated because it was taking so long. And so he called out to the woman behind the counter and used a racial slur. I didn't know at the time, but called her a girl and said a few other things. And so it became pretty intense. My dad stopped and turned around, put his hand up actually, and said, "That's enough." And, so I thought there was going to be a rumble in Bonaparte's Fried Chicken. And so we get in the car, and obviously, my dad was able to have a conversation with me about the challenge of, judging people based on the color of their skin in the South and the history of the South. And it was just such a great experience. I mean, I had some great conversations with my dad around that. For some reason, he had such a wide open view. But you think about, that was years ago.
Right.
And here we are years later. And does it feel like things have gotten better?
Oh.
It's still very intense.
Yeah.
And maybe even more intense. I think we ought to talk about it a little bit, some of the tension that we're facing right now.
I'm just telling you now. There is a lot of tension still right now. I know when it started, when it hit fever pitch, was the 2016 election. That year was...
That was only 4 years ago.
Oh, my goodness. Man, it was intense. And if anybody knows me, I like to laugh a lot. And No.
Educate us.
Especially when it's tense and it's awkward. I'm the dude that's going to make that joke to try to bring some levity to the room. So I decided in 2016 I was going to do a teaching series on politics, right? I had this big idea.
Oh, Wayne, you should have called me. Bro, you should have called me.
That's why we're the Life Church now, man.
That's so funny.
I'm like, God wants this Oval Office in our chest, not the one in Washington, D.C., and I'm preaching and all this stuff, and we had this series, and I thought, well, I got to bring some comic relief to what we're doing. So everybody knows about the tension of the MAGA hat, Make America Great Again. So I was like, I'm going to make a little riff on that. So I made up Make Westchester Great Again hats, which is the county that we live in. And on that Sunday, I had about 100 of them, and I just went Oprah with it. Like, you get a hat, you get a hat, you get a hat, everybody gets a hat. You literally would have thought I released mosquitoes in that room. People were swatting. I'm like...
Nobody wanted that hat.
No! I wasted all of that money.
So it said, make Westchester great again.
Make Westchester great again. I thought it was funny. They were like, no. Lost all kind of people because of my silly joke. Well,
so our president obviously hadn't helped matters, and you have that iconic red hat that seems to be a symbol. But you also have the media.
Yes.
And you have celebrities.
Correct.
And you have athletes who have all spoken up, and I'm not sure have really helped the situation and moved the ball up the field. Obviously, we believe in freedom of speech, and thank God we can speak out. But I guess that's a part of the issue, though, is it just doesn't seem like you can have honest dialogue.
No.
It doesn't seem like you can even talk about anything without the fear of getting canceled.
Oh yeah, that's right. You're canceled, Pastor.
And you were the one that first taught me about the cancel culture.
One day we were having a conversation. I was like, "Oh, you're canceled, Pastor John. I don't know about."
And I was like, "I'm what?" Explain this cancel culture thing.
Well, cancel culture. We've got to go to the Urban Dictionary to get this going. Cancel culture basically is if I disagree with your point of view, particularly as it relates to gender, race, or politics, I am blocking you out. I will no longer have you a part of my people group.
Wow.
I will not listen to what you're basically you're canceled. I disqualify your opinion and I shut down the conversation.
And so this fear of speaking up or even asking questions is so prevalent. You have this fear of saying the wrong thing. And so I think maybe in this moment right now, it's a good moment for me to ask for grace.
Yeah.
And that, there are times we have well intentions, whether it's a white person or a black person or a Hispanic person. We have good intentions, but we say the wrong thing.
Right.
We ask the wrong question. We go over the top with something.
Yeah.
And so I think it would be great if you could give me some grace as we start this conversation, and that we give each other grace to be able to have this conversation.
Well, one of the things that I think about this cancel culture is that we don't think about the spirit behind the cancel culture, that it's a spirit of division.
True.
It's really what it is. It's trying to divide us. And so in John 17, we see Jesus praying to make us one because he wanted unity. And yet for all this spirit of cancellation is like, I don't want to hear from you. I'm done with you. So the big question is, can you love somebody that you disagree with? Particularly if they're of a different skin hue. Can you love somebody that has a totally different worldview from you, particularly when it comes to the matter and issue of race?
But you didn't answer my question. I asked you for grace.
That's because you're canceled.
I'm canceled already?
I'm uncanceling you. All right. Okay, so, yes.
So let's talk about some ground rules.
Yes.
We're giving each other grace.
Yeah.
But how about maybe some defining terms that we can use that kind of serve as ground rules to have these kind of discussions?
Yeah, I think it's very important for us to, number one, listen, to look, and you got to learn and laugh.
All starting with L.
Absolutely.
How about that?
A little alliteration to help you remember.
Can you say them again?
Listen.
All right.
Then you got to look.
Right.
Then you've got to learn and laugh. Let me start with listen.
Okay.
First of all, we got to listen to each other. That's why we're facilitating conversation tonight. Not to tweets and sound bites and Facebook posts and your favorite talking head on whatever media outlet you like to get your news from. We've got to listen to each other without interrupting each other all the time, without canceling each other, because all of us have hang-ups and hurts and hurdles that we need to really listen to.
We listen, then we look.
Yeah.
And I think there's something even powerful about just looking somebody in the eye. As you listen to them, looking them in the eye, but then also being willing to look into what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Easy to dismiss someone's opinion because we disagree with it.
So true.
Because we don't feel the same way about it.
So true.
But like in any relationship, friendship, marriage, you listen and you look into whatever the other person is bringing up because it's important to them. And then learn.
Yeah.
I think what I've loved about our relationship is I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
I've learned how to speak Jamaican.
Yes. Win.
And I've learned, I've just learned a lot from you about pastoring and about diversity and so many different things and all of our relationships as we come together. We can learn from people. But, you and I spent some time reading some books to get ready for the series. And so I think we wanted to talk about these just for a minute.
Absolutely.
And I'll kind of go through them, and I'd love for you to, jump in and mention your thoughts about them. But there's a lot of good books out there. These are not, all of them by any means, just 4 of them that we decided to read. 2 of them.
Great books.
2 of them are really more toward the church.
Yeah.
Not necessarily toward pastors, but toward the church. This is a great one by John Perkins.
Loved it.
One Blood.
Absolutely.
And he actually gives some pretty good theological, it's not a theological book, but he gives some great theology for
us being one race with one blood.
One blood, one
race. And has
race.
strong biblical foundation to push out. He's an icon.
Yeah, he's been around a long time. He's at the end of his life. He reckons this might be his last book that he's ever written.
Yep.
And there's a picture of him somewhere in here.
When people say their last words, you want to perk up your ears.
Yeah, John Perkins. He's been a statesman really on this subject. So this is called Parting Words to the Church on Race and Love.
So good.
Really good book. And then this is called Woke Church.
Woke.
I mentioned this a year ago to our church that I read. This is by Eric Mason, who you know.
In the Northeast. Let's go.
He's a pastor of a church. And I like the tagline of the book, an urgent call for Christians in America to confront racism and injustice. Woke Church. You want to talk about it?
I think this is a classic book to read that'll give you some insight on what it looks like to actually penetrate.
What does it mean to be woke?
To be woke is to be aware, to be to have a consciousness about the state of race in North America, not to be sleeping or slipping, but to be woke.
Am I woke?
We're gonna find out.
I guess I set myself up for that one.
You did.
But I was counting on some positive
reaffirmation,
encouragement. Woke Church, good book. Then this one we both read together, and this one is a great book. But
you're gonna need Google to search some of them words. They were big words.
Keep a dictionary nearby. Brilliant,
fascinating
guy. And obviously, the first section was really heady, and then it's called Unlearning Race: Self-Portrait in Black and White. What's interesting about this book is this guy has a white mom
and a black dad.
Yep. And so he kind of talks about that idea of being mixed. There was a quote I wanted to find.
Oh, I know which one. I think
let's see if I can find it. You know which one I'm talking about?
I think so.
He has this conversation with his dad. He said sometimes my father would even half jest that his wife wasn't really white at all. She was just light-skinned. And he said, I'd laugh. And then once when I was about 10, I pressed him. I said, come on, you don't really believe that, do you? And he said, well, she's got black consciousness, doesn't she?
Yeah, she's woke.
And I thought that's a good, I was hoping you would call me woke, but anyway, I'm not. I'm gonna move on. This last one, I'll get back at you.
I know.
Before it's over with. This last one is a great book called White Picket Fences. And this is a book about white privilege. Mm. And we're going to talk about white privilege at some point in this series, which is a big subject.
Yeah.
An important subject. But I highly recommend this book. I think every white person should read this book.
Yeah.
I think it's educational. It's written by a white woman, but she clearly addresses this subject and has a lot to say. And
I found it to be a fascinating read. It was expansive and very digestible, something that you can read, and it's going to affect you at the heart level in a big way.
Right.
But the last thing that we need to do
is
we got to laugh. Like, come on, people, we got to laugh,
yeah,
man.
So
like,
true.
We're going to do a lot of laughing in this series, and if I got anything to do it, we're going to laugh a whole lot. But I can tell you that until we start to understand the languages that unite us, like music and laughter, we're going to have a whole hard time dealing with each other.
Right.
So we got to laugh. Otherwise, I'm canceling everybody. Everybody
Look, I'm not worried about us laughing as long as you're here. And it's one of the things I love about you, and one of the ways that you make me better by laughing. And let's make sure that we have some fun in it while we work hard. We've worked hard to get ready for this series, but we've laughed a lot. Thanks to you. Not so much thanks to me, but thanks to you. I think we should close with, Wayne, some big statements that we sort of kind of came to as we read the books and had our own discussion. Some big picture statements.
Yeah.
Not necessarily big statements, big picture statements about this subject.
Yeah.
And I'm going to maybe kind of run through some of them. You pop in where you want to pop in, and then you're going to finish with a couple of them. But I think these are important. And number one seems obvious, but it may not be. Racism is a problem. So a lot of people would say, well, it was a problem. But we want to make sure that we reiterate it is a problem.
Yeah.
Maybe stating the obvious, but for some people it's not. Number two, the gospel is the solution.
Yes.
And I don't want us to be overly spiritual.
We talked about that, yeah.
Because sometimes we can couch difficult things in spiritual terms.
Yeah.
But it really is a gospel. It's a gospel solution.
Yeah.
Because here's what Paul said in Romans. He said, I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes.
Everyone.
So the power of God, the gospel, is the power of God to change hearts.
Yes.
And that's what we need. We need God to change people's hearts about this subject. A part of the gospel is when we meet Jesus and when we have a relationship with God through Jesus, he reconciles us to God.
Yes.
Right? Jesus is the way.
Yeah.
He reconciles us to God, and then he calls us very clearly in Scripture to reconcile with one another.
Absolutely.
And to reconcile means to settle your differences. It means to close the gap.
Yep.
And so we believe the gospel is the solution. But number three, it's more than a spiritual problem.
Yes.
It's a historical problem.
Yep.
It's a practical problem. We can't spiritualize it. We got to make sure we get into the practicals. And then number four, it's complicated.
So true.
It's not something we're just going to.
It's not easy.
Have one conversation about.
Right.
We're not going to just check it off the list. And I think we're not naive about this in knowing that even this series maybe could unsettle some people.
We're not looking for an add water and stir solution.
Right. Number five, and this is where maybe it gets personal, white people, all right? I'm white, in case you haven't.
I haven't noticed.
So I can speak for myself, and I think we have to seek to understand and acknowledge the sin of slavery and the mistreatment of black people, which has resulted in a justifiable lack of trust and even anger. Yeah. Sometimes anger that's just below the surface. Sometimes, more outright anger, and it's a part of our history.
Yep.
This stuff that we talk about, that's so hard to talk about, is a part of our history.
Yeah.
And we can't act like it's not.
Yeah.
And I think some white people would say, well, I wasn't there and I didn't do that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't take away the generational impact.
Yeah.
And the work that still needs to be done in our society.
Yeah.
In the hearts and in the minds of people.
Yeah. There's a generational PTSD that we have to acknowledge. And on the other hand, black people in turn have to forgive white people for previous and present injustices, while simultaneously not harboring hatred and racism towards white people. That's a big deal. That there has to be reciprocity that's going back and forth. And we feel like unless there is some reciprocity, we're going to have some issues. We can't allow media and extreme groups and talking heads to keep us separate. We have to get into a place where we actually are starting to forgive one another, and where we can direct the forgiveness in places that we don't have to deem whether the person deserves it or not. That we just have to be agnostic to it and say, we're going to give you forgiveness. There's this wonderful story in 2 Kings that I love. And it starts off, it's one of those biblical dun 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 kind of stories. And we learn about a guy named Naaman. And Naaman, he actually is interested because he has position. He's the captain of an army. So he's got some swag. He is very, very important and powerful in his culture. He also has privilege because the story tells us that he is highly respected by everybody around him. But the Bible also digs down a little bit deeper and tells us that he has a problem. He has leprosy. And leprosy in the Old Testament was always a type of sin, this heinous disease that would cause your bones to shrivel and for you to get all different types of sores. But there's also another verse after it that says that his army captured a slave girl, an Israelite girl. She's working for his wife. And she says to his wife one day, I wish that our master could hear about Elisha the prophet. Because he could heal him. What I think is fascinating about that story is that this is a slave girl that's being oppressed by somebody, but she's pointing her master to the solution to heal his leprosy.
Wow.
So as a black man, I think that it's powerful when we start saying, I'm going to forgive, I'm going to point people to the solution. And this girl typifies that. Now, this cancel culture thing, I found this scripture. I think we do have to cancel people. I'm just going to be honest. But there's a biblical way to cancel people. Colossians chapter 2 and verse 14 says, he, Jesus, canceled the record of the charges against us and took it away by nailing it to the cross.
Wow.
So in other words, when we forgive people, we're canceling them the right way. We need to cancel debts.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. And then number 7, we're finishing right here. Unless we make a solid, this is sort of the conclusion, the big picture. If there is a statement for the series, it's this, that we want to make a solid, intentional choice to connect, understand, reach, and love one another.
Absolutely.
And if we don't, we will remain divided.
Absolutely.
And we can't afford to remain divided.
You know, the framework of our current context isn't one that we created, but we're in it. That's the reality. So that means that even though we didn't create it, we have a responsibility, a generational responsibility to be the answer, the remedy, the antidote to push us forward to the future that God has designed, which is a diverse future of unity and reconciliation.
So let's not stay divided.
Come on.
Let's come together.
We're coming together. We're not playing games.
Awesome.
Yes.
Come on, can we stand to our feet, everybody, and at every one of our locations? Yeah, come on, can we give it up and thank God for the word? Thank God to have the freedom to be able to talk about it. I want to thank you for putting in the work, me and you getting in the trenches, talking about the hard things in preparation for the series, and then just having an open heart.
I want to thank you, Pastor, for the courage for doing this series. Isn't this amazing that our pastor's given us an opportunity to have such an open-hearted conversation? Thank you.
And we are doing this series in New York as well at Authentic Church, which is soon to be Life Church. So it's a It's a partner series, and we've been really excited about it. And we've declared 2020 as the year of prayer. And I certainly think that this is one area where we can't just talk, we do need to pray, because things happen when we pray.
Absolutely.
Prayer goes up, right? And God's power comes down and God's presence comes down. And to be able to gather together, even in this type of setting in church, and pray together with people who are different than us. And so we're going to take a minute to do that right now.
You know, we did this series with one little tagline as well, that we should have an open mind, an open heart, and open hands. And I don't know if you've noticed, but you can't give or receive anything with a clenched fist. And so here in this moment, I'm gonna ask you to do something. Open up your heart big and wide, but also open up your hands. Find 3 or 5 people in your area and grab their hand, and we're gonna pray. Now, here's something else though. Grab somebody else's hand that got a different skin hue than you, okay? Find somebody in your area, about 3 or 5 of you around, and let's pray together.
We're going to take a couple minutes, pray for each other, pray for church, pray for our city, and pray for our country. And not huge groups, because it gets impersonal when you do that. Be able to look around the circle and pray. Come on, let's do it.